the meat sauces, the bouillon cubes, those kinds of things. So simply doing some fairly fundamental research in their research group in Vevey, Switzerland. And the last one was actually on the Riviera. So, it's a tough job, but I looked at it and said, I'll give it a shot. The best part, of course, was sitting out in the flower garden in January, overlooking Cannes and Nice and thinking of your friends back home, in snow. But my job then was primarily looking at encapsulation. How do we protect flavors? And so I've had a little bit of experience in the industry, from formulation to encapsulation, delivery, and creation of savory. It's really a fun industry. It's a small industry. When I was a student, maybe about your stage of life or a little bit earlier, went to IFT. And at that time, students were welcome at all the hospitality suites. And of course, you go hospitality suite hopping. And one of the hospitality suites, people were just having a ball. They were telling jokes back and forth and having fun. And I thought they were all from one company. I found out they were all from different companies and all competitors. And it was a flavor industry. And I thought, that's kind of neat. It's a small industry. Our total sales of fragrance flavoring materials are about $26 billion. That's globally. So it is a small industry. And as you'll see a little bit later on, it's dominated by a few large companies, a tremendous number of small companies. So it's really a fascinating industry. It's relevant. If you think about why do I eat? I eat purely, well, I was going to say purely for love, but I guess if I didn't eat long enough, it would be for hunger also. But we tend to eat because we like a food. We make our choices based on things we like. And flavor plays a real important role in that. It's the number one attribute, the number one complaint a company gets. If the flavor doesn't meet the requirements of the consumer, anticipation of the consumer, they don't buy it again. It doesn't matter how nutritious it is, how good it is for you. They will not buy that again. Few people hold their nose, and stuff something down their stomach. It just doesn't go. So it's really irrelevant and, like I say, a fun industry in my view. Now we got to figure out how we go to the next one. Now that looks like a good choice, doesn't it? Okay. And so I'll go through the course syllabus for you. You've gotten that. We will have 5 or 6 labs during this time period, totally optional. If you don't want to come, don't come. If you want to come to it. It's going to be rather, well, I'll give you some of the dates. But anyway, it'll be an opportunity to smell, taste, and actually create some things. So I think that's one of the next slides coming up. So we really deal with both flavor, what is flavor, how is it created, how is it protected, how is it delivered, and we're going to deal with off flavors. Actually, my favorite laboratory class of the entire semester is going to be the one on off flavors, where we prepare the most horrid things you could ever imagine. Rancid potatoes, rancid potato chips, I should say. Rancid milk, so it's sour, it's curdled. You can imagine what that's like. We get into some nice enzyme things where enzymes take activity and create some interesting products. You think about Mai Tais. You probably have had Mai Tai sometime in your life. Coconut milk plus pineapple. Pineapple is a wonderful source of enzyme. Coconut is a wonderful source of C12, lauric acid. What's lauric acid taste like? Soap. So, again, a problematic issue sometimes. Pina coladas, those types of products, will develop soapiness. It's not because somebody left the sanitizer in, at least I hope they didn't. It's because of the enzyme reaction. So I say the off-flavor one is my favorite. Why is it my favorite? Well, I'm an analytical chemist largely by training, but I believe in people. And if you've tasted some of these things once, you'll remember them. You'll never forget them. And when you come across that type of a defect, you'll say, I know what this is. This is soapy. It comes from this. I tasted that back in flavor class. If you become familiar with some of these things, you will remember them. And it'll be useful to you in your job when you run across problems. So I think that's why I like the flavor or off-flavor portion so much. There's some things that we hope you learn in the process. This is a kind of the course. We might do a little bit of changing around of things, kind of depends upon time and where we go, but some of the topics that we plan to cover, hope to cover during the semester. These are the labs. I have to be at a meeting on September 30th, so I'm thinking of getting First Choice Ingredients. They're a flavor company. They're happy to come in and talk about dairy flavors. Where do dairy flavors come from? How are they created? How are they made? So I'm going to try and invite them in for this, but our first class I know is going to happen will be flavoring materials, September 10th. You'll be given maybe 6-8 chemicals, and you'll say, well, create a nice cherry flavor for me. Go for it. And then you'll have a chance of mixing this with that and this and that, and hopefully come out with a nice cherry. In the end, the instructor will taste them and see what they think. How's that? So, flavor creation, opportunity to make a flavor from pure bottles of flavor chemicals. So flavor materials, that is just looking at the materials. Okay, so you'll get a bunch of materials to smell and taste. Then we do the creation on the 24th. We use them to create a flavor. We'll do encapsulation on October 15th. That'll be done partially out in the pilot plant. So you'll get a chance to look at the number one technique process for making encapsulated flavors, dry flavorings. Everybody loves dry flavorings. Nobody wants to having drums of liquid or, something about microbial growth in some cases, something about cost of containers, shipping weight, and so on. Everyone wants dry ingredients. Okay, let's take this liquid flavor. Most of them are liquids. Let's make it into a powder. And by the way, that powder is not going to be very permeable to oxygen, so it's going to protect the flavor from oxidation. So, easy way to ship, efficient way to ship and protect. Then we go into some other types of flavor work, processed flavorings. Let's make a meat. So we'll make a vegetarian meat. Doesn't that sound appropriate for today? Where would we use that? Imitation meat, right? Well, we can make a flavor. It's a natural flavoring, by the way, that we will use in this. And actually, we just did a project last week for a company that's going to be very significant in the marketplace, a flavoring for artificial. Plant-based meat sounds better. Okay, forget the artificial. Plant-based meat products. And so, flavor analysis, if you would look at the back row, we got 3 people from the laboratory that are all doing flavor analysis. So we're going to spend significant amount of time with that. It's really relevant to have some appreciation for analysis. You might never be doing analysis. That may never be your job. But to your sense, a good chance you're going to get some data from someone, sometime. And if you know something about the methods, you're able to interpret that data. Do I trust that data? Was that data, do you think it's valid, and so on? So we are going to spend some time on analysis from that standpoint. Flavor applications, sure. How are we supposed to use flavors? There's liquid flavors, there's paste, there's emulsions, dry flavors, spray chilled flavors, many different flavor forms. Well, in what products do you use what flavor form? So we'll talk about putting flavor in real foods, how we choose that flavor for that food to perform best. And as I said, my favorite, off flavors in foods. So we'll just go through the common off flavors. And that'll be a pretty simple one. There's some real big ones. Lipid oxidation, non-enzymatic browning, enzyme reactions are the 3 major. We could talk about microbial growth, some other things, but those 3 are the big ones. And the labs that we run will be a little over an hour, and we'll probably be in room 23 is where I think we'll try and get in. And like I said, I'd like to know before you get there if you're going to come. That depends upon how many materials we prepare for the class. There's only 2 grading opportunities, so 50% of your grades on the midterm, 50% on the final exam. I will be giving you chapters from the textbook. It's a Flavor Chemistry and Technology, 2006. That will be revised one of these years. So, but for right now, I'm still going to send you a chapter. We're covering this, I'll send you that chapter. You'll simply get that book in pieces as we're going to cover it. There really isn't any other textbook in the flavor area, which is, I don't know if it's interesting or not. The flavor industry is extremely secretive. Nobody likes to tell people how they've done and what they've done it. And so there's really, people aren't publishing in this area. And so there's many different areas. You get nice books, by maybe many authors. You don't find that in the flavor area. It's just a very secretive industry. And they don't tend to share that. Well, this lecture is really a mix. Oh, that's a great slide. Do you have something in yours? Oh, good. I think I've been a bad choice of colors there. It was a shaded. So anyway, you'll find these are the major companies that are in the flavor business. Givaudan is number one, slightly over $5 billion. Then we get into Firmenich, and there's a significant drop from Givaudan, number one, to Firmenich. These are the top three. Then we go into Symrise. So it's an American company. The majority of their activities, really, at this point, their research activities are in the U.S. There's also in Europe as well. Firmenich has really a large factory research group on the East Coast of New Jersey. This is Cincinnati, New Jersey. And they're also a Swiss company. International Flavors and Fragrances, again on the East Coast, U.S. based. Symrise was Germany, but now a lot of work is coming out of the U.S. as well. Monfils is on the French Riviera. It's not a bad place to be. Frutarom Takasako is Japanese. Sensient is from the U.S. Large research activity in the U.S., but French-based company. Hasegawa, Japanese. And I don't know the last company. I haven't run across them yet. I should have Googled them. I don't even know who they are. How's that? They show up in the top 11 or whatever it is, and I didn't even know them. So a lot of this growth has been by purchasing. It's cheaper to purchase technology, purchase success than to develop it. Kind of a crummy attitude if you're in the job market and say, I want to get into this field. And then say, they're not doing a lot of product development, they're buying the technology. So total market that's for 2017, $26.3 billion US dollars. 11 companies, I don't know if that's 11, perhaps 77% of the market. Top 5 companies are 61% of the market. So there are a lot of flavor companies, and you won't know them. It's interesting, as a consumer, let's say, you don't know who happened to put the flavor in your General Mills product or in your Cargill product, or take your pick. You never see them. The consumer never sees these companies. There's only one exception I can think of that's really obvious, and that's McCormick & Company. McCormick does have a real significant consumer base as well, consumer products. So you'll see them, but we tend not to see these other companies. They're invisible. They're a supplier to, like I say, our other major companies. Well, 5-year industry growth, that's could have been updated, but 2013, 2018, things haven't changed much in the last year. Where's the major growth taking place? You probably shouldn't be surprised. Africa, Asia, Central America, places where there's transitions in diet, what type of food, how the food's prepared, going away from, let's say, more made at home and whatever we have to prepared foods. So this is where the growth in flavor sales are. 4%, 4.5%. You'll notice who's down here kind of at the bottom. Western Europe, South America, North America. Very developed food systems. They're just not developing the same number of new products. So if they develop a new product, they replace another formulated flavored product. So there isn't the growth in sales associated with that market. Where is flavor used? So where do these flavors go? It shouldn't surprise you, beverages are 34%. on a global basis. Think of all the flavored products, beverage products there are. There's a heck of a bunch of them. They're number one. Dairy is number two. And again, you think about whether it's yogurt, whether it's ice cream. Think of many different dairy-based beverages. Okay, that's number two. We got, I think that's other over here, 10, so we won't count that one. Then we get into bakery. That's an example, again, flavoring different baked goods. So there's other things in there, oral hygiene. You think about oral health care, toothpaste, mouthwashes. If it goes in the mouth, it's going to be called a flavor. If it goes behind your ear, that's a fragrance. How's that? Well, maybe you don't put that here. But anyway, these flavor companies are also generally perfume companies or fragrance companies. And so they do go together. This looks at only the flavor part of these sales. Beverage meats, dairy, and of course, this idea of imitation meats, plant-based meats, certainly will put a real boost in terms of the flavor market. Comment about anticipated growth areas, Philippines, Indonesia, where there's a growing population, a change in how people eat. There's going to be a growth in flavors. What do they do? I was kind of looking at the slide a little bit ago. A supplier of plant and animal extracts and isolates. They didn't like the animal in there. How's that? I don't know. The connotation is you're taking an extract of an animal. I'm going to get that cow and take an extract out of it. And that troubled me a bit. So we really don't use extracts of animals. We may use an extract of milk, an isolate from milk, a fat from milk to get butyric acid or something, some flavor component out of dairy products, for example. There's a lot of myth. That's one of the biggest problems we run into is myths. And one of the questions I commonly get, and I get a lot of questions from the press and various places around the world, which is weird. But they talk about, do you go after musk deer, the scent glands, or these musk deer, and you use this in flavoring? No, we don't do that. How about ambergris from whales? No, we don't do that. Why? There's not enough of these materials, and they'd be extremely expensive. To say nothing about the issue of kind of harvesting certain parts of an animal. What do you do with the rest of it? It isn't done. So when I think of what the flavor company does, they are a supplier of plant extracts and isolates. That's the number one source of flavored materials, comes from plants. Certainly they supply, so these are complex mixtures. Orange oil. You take an orange, you rasp that surface, you wash that surface out, you get oil. You centrifuge, you collect that oil, orange oil. So an extract probably has 100 components, maybe 150 components in that orange oil. So complex mixtures of extracts or isolates. They also make aroma chemicals. It's an interesting thing when you think about chemicals and aroma chemicals specifically, is that some chemicals are used in large quantities. They can be produced fairly cheaply if it's enough volume. If you think about aroma chemicals, some of those chemicals may be used in 1 kilogram per year globally. And you think, okay, what's the economics of producing this? It has to be real difficult to make. It always is. And so there just isn't a market. You can't get into mass production of these things. So the aroma chemicals that are made by oftentimes 1 or 2 companies, and those 1 or 2 companies sell to the other flavor companies. So it's kind of everybody works together to supply the chemicals needed. I'll digress now then. The idea of one company supplying a lot of other companies came to light and very sorely many years ago at this point, where you probably had cherry Coke at some point. You probably had a number of cherry-flavored carbonated beverages. And it was interesting that some student, once some grad student, they're troublemakers, They got a new piece of equipment and they were able to look at chemicals for radioactivity. And anything that's made today, grown today, has some radioactivity. There's some, carbon, C14, it decomposes, not a lot, right? But some small amount. And so anything that comes from a plant that's grown in the earth has radioactive carbon, and you can measure. This is what the student had. The means of measuring C14. And he said, look at cherry flavoring that comes out of cherry Coke. And he did isolation of the components that give cherry flavor, and there wasn't any carbon 14. It was being sold to everyone as a natural flavorant. They were paying the price of the natural flavor, but it never come near a plant in its life. It was made in a synthetic factory, distributed globally. Every company was accused of selling adulterated artificial products as natural. And that kind of thing happens because it may be made by one place, distributed through some other ones, and you don't really know what happens in between. But that was really an interesting one. There's a lot of teeth gnashing and saying, oh my God, how did we get in this situation? So, aroma chemicals. Taste chemicals, they do supply taste chemicals. We're going to talk about what is flavor. When someone says flavor to me, it's the aroma, it's the taste, it's the mouthfeel that you get. It's more that it's not just what it smells like, it's what it goes in your mouth. It's the combination of all your sensory cues that make up flavor. So if we're going to talk about the smell of something, that's not flavor. That's smell, that's odor, that's aroma. So we got to put these together before we get flavor. And that's interesting to me. And one of the questions asked this morning in the meeting, we had fortunate enough to have a guest from FONA, F-O-N-A. FONA is a flavor company in Chicago, just west suburb of Chicago. One of our past grads, and so she was visiting. Now, where the heck was I going with that? I got lost. I took a turn someplace. She came in, and what did she tell us about? Well, anyway, she did a research in taste. How's that? And so, getting to put together. For a long time, when they talk about flavor, people talked about aroma. And the aroma, it's coming back to me. And the aroma is what the companies sell. Flavor companies sell aroma. They don't sell flavor. They sell aroma. They don't sell the taste or the taste components. Salt, sweet, sour, bitter, mouthfeel, whatever. Heat of peppers, the cooling of menthol. They don't sell that. They sell it aroma only. And my question to her was that we're really finding that these have to all come together. Traditionally, the flavor company sends companies a big drum of aroma, and they let the food company do the taste part, mouthfeel, and so on. And I was asking her, is the industry finally getting to the point where they said, yeah, we should sell a whole package here. Let's give you aroma, mouthfeel, all these other things as one. She said it's a slow road. They're moving, but they're not there at this point. So when we talk about flavor, we're going to talk about this summation, but most of the time, I'm going to be talking about aroma. That's where we spend our greatest amount of time today. Making progress here, but we don't have nearly the information on taste that we do about aroma, or the techniques to study them. Typical company, when you walk into a flavor company and you walk into a creation laboratory, you got somewhere around 4,700, 5,000 chemicals in front of you. Okay, let's make a banana flavor. Which of these 5,000 do we want to use? It's kind of a fun. It's interesting to go in and see all the choices they have. How do they make those choices? Well, it comes mainly from experience. To be a flavorist, you have to have 5 years of experience. You've got to be working for some professional who's done this their lifetime, and they train you. Basically, you're a grunt who does the formulation for them, and hopefully in the process you learn what you need to do it yourself. How's that? But somewhere around 4,700, 5,000 chemicals you have at your disposal. The idea is picking the right ones, blending together to make finished products. As I said, almost all companies are flavor and fragrance. They oftentimes use the same materials. A little bit of orange oil can give a nice fresh note to a fragrance. So it doesn't have to just be for orange flavoring. It can be for fragrances. There's a number of flowers that come across very nicely. And those flowers can do wonders to blueberry. So they can go back and forth. And so flavor, fragrance come together. There's a number of common materials. They truly are a chemical company. The first time I walked into a flavor company, I kind of thought, where the heck am I? There were people, with a big stack of, looked like hay, got a little closer. They were shoving flowers with a fork standing in them, tossing them into a big pot where they're going to boil them off and get the fragrance from them that they would use in flavors or fragrances. They're a chemical company. Standards over time have changed sufficiently. They're getting to be more tiled and drained and all these other things, but it wasn't so long ago. They were simply a chemical company. You don't have to worry about pathogens and chemicals, right? You got a pure chemical, nothing's going to grow in it. So there's a different standard, or was a different standard. Where are we going these days? Simple, cleaner labels, right? Natural, GMO, take your pick of what you want to put on the front label. But that certainly puts a lot of pressure on flavor companies. You start saying GMO, if there's no genetically manipulated material in here. Oh gosh, that gets rather problematic, because many of your materials, raw materials, might come from a corn source, for example. And if the corn isn't GMO, well, then we've got a problem that we can't use the flavor that comes from the corn, or a flavor may be encapsulated. We put in nice little starch particles. Well, okay, again, what about the corn that's in here? So the idea of GMO, there's actually no way in a flavoring material would you find any genetic material. These are volatile organic chemicals that they've isolated some food. But the requirement is still, if it comes from a GMO source, it cannot be GMO, free label. So it's really an interesting one. Mitigation of raw flavors due to natural ingredients and new formulations. When I inserted plant protein in there, what are we looking for these days? We're looking for plant proteins. Replace animal proteins. Let's say broaden our choices, more sustainability. So the idea of plant protein. Yara is working on pea protein, off flavors in pea protein. Peshan is working on pennycress. So the idea that looking at these raw materials, and if they're carrying a pea flavor, it comes from green peas, they're not going to be well accepted. The isolates that come out of that, they're going to be rather unpleasant. You may want them to taste like roast beef, not green peas. And so there's a lot of work looking at how we deal with new proteins.
Artificial or natural flavors versus artificial. Would the chemical structure be the same and the source just be different?
That's the number one question I get. What's the difference between natural and artificial? Is there a difference between them? And I got myself in trouble with my answer. There's an organization called Flavor Extract Manufacturers Association. I got an award from them for something. And it was funny that when I got it, I put the nice little glass thing on my desk, and the department head came down and said, "Oh my God, FEMA, this is, what is it, emergency housing and whatever. How did you get an award from FEMA?" I was just lucky. No, it's Flavor Extract Manufacturers Association. I probably told them at some point. But they are the company or the group that looks after flavorings from a legal standpoint, natural, artificial. They get involved with making influence of, say, regulation. And so I got in trouble with them because the main question I get, or most often question I get from, like it is, other kinds of sources, is, are artificial flavors safe? I won't put that up for a vote. How's that? But we could put it up for a vote. And my comment is, well, if you think about it, A chemical is a chemical. If you're looking at benzaldehyde, which is the foundation of cherry, it's the same one that the plant made it, or whether it was made in a chemical factory. And so we have exactly the same chemicals between natural flavor and artificial. And they must be the same chemicals, or it doesn't taste like what you're trying to mimic. So we have exactly the same chemicals. By the way, they're in exactly the same proportion, because if they're not, just sticking out like crazy. There's some other notes, you have a mixture of chemicals. It has to be the right proportion too. So it's got to be the same chemicals used in the same proportion. And so then where I got in trouble was, I said, natural flavors, man, when I have a cup of coffee, I've got over 900 chemicals in that cup of coffee. Over 250 of them are not on any safety list. As a matter of fact, many of them are known to be mutagenic, teratogenic, carcinogenic, whatever. But I said, well, if you get an artificially flavored cup of coffee, you get only the chemicals that have been chosen that are tested and safe. So I said, in my opinion, you're much safer eating artificially flavored foods than you are natural foods. And if you think nature's safe and there aren't carcinogens and toxic viruses, come mushroom hunting with me. I don't know one mushroom from another. We would all die and early. Well, I can't die early, but anyway, you guys would. So there's a little bit of tongue in cheek because I like to tease about these things, but it's really true. It is safer to have artificially flavored products than it is naturally flavored products. And what I got in trouble for is that implied that natural flavors are not safe. And they said, well, Gary, maybe you should back up because natural flavors are safe. We consume them in plants every day. Why don't you try some other line? But anyway, does that respond to your question? Okay. The idea of maintaining freshness, having flavors last longer. People don't throw out food because of nutritional value has fallen below a certain point. They throw something out because it doesn't taste good most of the time. And so the idea, if you can protect the flavor and maintain that flavor quality, you stand a better chance of making better use of your foods, more efficient use of foods. Sustainably sourced ingredients, flavoring materials? Sure. What can we do along those lines? Shelf life, new product formulations, addressing unintended changes in flavor profile. We'll be dealing with some of these in the class. Innovative flavor textures, primarily in beverage applications. Beverages are really an active area in terms of development of products. It's interesting that natural flavor does have some romance to it, some desirable opinion, whatever. And it's interesting that oftentimes when we say this essential oil is, from this plant is what we've used for this, well, less than 1.8% of essential oils, less than 8%, are from cultivated sources. I'm sorry, get rid of that on. The vast majority are grown in farms and wherever. And so they're not as exotic or romantic as they may seem. It's another field out there. They're simply growing flavoring materials. So, okay. There's always an idea of how to repurpose, reuse waste streams and products that might go to waste. If you would go to largest coffee roasting company in the world, you would go through their operation. You would see where they roast their coffee beans. They take these aromas that are coming off, these hot beans that are roasting them, and they run them through a liquid nitrogen-cooled condenser. They condense all the aroma that's coming off that coffee, and they have a real lot of source of interesting flavor chemicals that can go back for coffee, or they can be used in other places. So they used to simply vent it to the atmosphere. They don't do that anymore. So they're starting to make use of what was a waste stream. Fusel alcohols are another one. I think that comes up in, not the next slide, someplace along the line. Fusel alcohols are alcohols left over after you distill a product. So if you talk about scotch or whiskey, any distilled beverage, you go through a fermentation. That fermentation just doesn't produce ethanol and a little bit of flavor. It produces alcohols that can not be so pleasant in terms of hangovers the next day or whatever else. They tend to be toxic. And so it's interesting that these fusel alcohols have been problematic to dispose of, but now they're used as a starting material for new flavorings. And I think I do get a slide someplace on that one. So what was a waste stream, now looking at making into a useful product. There's a lot of interest in flavor modulation. Again, our guest this morning from FONA talked about flavor modulation. Company wants to decrease sugar in their product by 50%. Okay, how do we make it sweet? Are there chemicals that you can add, such as vanilla? You add a little bit of vanilla to a product, it tastes sweeter, and there's no more sugar. So you're kind of enhancing the sweet perception through the use of flavorings. So there's a lot of effort along those lines. Can we accomplish certain effects by adding aroma that otherwise might be taste, for example? A lot of work in sweet to reduce the sugar. Let's get that label down in terms of sodium. So sweet, salt enhancers. A big area, of course, is bitter blockers. So bitter, objectionable flavors, how do we block those? And there's a fair amount of success in that area, finding things that block bitter. We look at whole grain breads. Many particular children really find whole grains to be bitter, products made from whole grains to be bitter. And so if you look at how bitter is perceived, it's the same receptors also respond to sugar. And so what the industry does, they tend to load it up with sugar because it tends to block the bitter perception. Well, that's not very desirable. We want to cut the calories. So can we enhance or can we block the bitter by other techniques? So it's really interesting. What can we do along these lines? There's a lot of hype. Talk is cheap. But there's still a lot of work going on. I think there's some good progress in that area. The idea of natural ingredients, cleaner labels. This just picked out 4 different flavor compounds that are used in formulation. Benzobutyrate, you can buy artificial for about $30 a kilogram. If you want to say, I want that to be natural source, please, it's going to cost me $970 per kilogram, 30 times more to go with a natural chemical than if it's an artificial chemical. Snamic-aldehyde, of course, is cinnamon, so that's only 4 times as much if you want a natural source. Decanal, 10 times greater. Gamma-decalactone, okay, what's that? 60, close to 60 times more expensive. And you think, okay, when you say, I want a natural flavor, you're going to pay for it as well. So it's really an interesting one. Clean labels, natural ingredients, wonderful. But then you've got to be willing to pay for it, both as a consumer and as a company. What are some of the opportunities and challenges that we have going on? Looking for new molecules that can be active in themselves. They can be blockers of bitterness. They can be enhancers. Again, like I say, a lot of work going in the area. Sweet salt enhancers get a better label. So looking for new chemicals that can have that effect. And we're really benefiting from big data handling. Because people have been doing analysis for a long time about, get some sensory data, get some analytical data. They may be looking for something else, but we start farming that and think, oh gosh, the presence of this chemical has resulted in the sensory panel saying it's sweeter. That wasn't the purpose of the study at all. But by data mining, people are really putting the data through the ringer and finding some really interesting things. Looking for natural ways to get natural labels, natural products. Controlled delivery and stability is certainly always a problem. And again, looking for how we apply things in foods for controlled release perception. So in terms of challenges, lack of research, innovation, flavor companies, unless you're really big, don't do a lot of research. I don't know if I mentioned there's maybe 500, 600 small flavor companies. There's the 11 biggies, and then you stick to the whole bunch of small ones. They really don't have a basis for being able to do research. And so research is hard to come by. Innovation is so new. This one always interests me. Preferred suppliers as a current business model for larger companies. What that means is if you go to General Mills and you say, well, I've really got a good idea of a wonderful flavor. Can I talk to your people? No, you're not on our list. You're not a big enough company or person to supply us, and we don't have any agreement with you, so forget it. It closes the door to a lot of innovation simply by not permitting smaller companies. They tend to really limit who they deal with. Regulatory, if you didn't want to ask somebody in the industry, what do they tear their hair about? It's regulatory. Absolutely no question. Labeling, classifications, or organic products, kosher, halal, and so on. And there's a very little uniformity. We've been trying for uniformity of flavor labeling across the globe, and that's been a really slow process. It's done differently everywhere. And so when you make a product, you really have to pay attention to where it's going so you meet the regulations of that particular country. It's interesting that sourcing new chemicals, new molecules, is certainly global in nature. I've got a chart someplace where there's pins on every place where flavors are grown, and they're all over the world. It's really a global market. There's oftentimes supply chain challenges, political, which is interesting. One example is, this comes from being in Brazil and going through some of the rainforest, some of the areas that people don't tend to be in, and again, sampling everything they can find, whether it's treetops or tree bottoms. What can we find? What's of interest to us? And there's an example of the soy lactose. It doesn't have to come from Brazil, but it's a tree that's cultivated in Indonesia. That's its origin. And it's the bark of a tree. The bark of this tree has this soy lactose. It's really coconut, is what it is. It's a nice coconut flavor. You smell it. It's pleasant. The essential oil is what happens if you take that wood, grind it up, put it in water, and distill off whatever comes, whatever fragrance materials, volatile materials. That's an essential oil. It comes by distillation, water distillation of materials. So put the bark in, water, distill it, you get an essential oil. 90% of that oil is made up of lactones. And there really aren't any good sources for lactones. And so this is really the attractive material if you want to do anything with coconut, peach, apricot, even some dairy products. A little bit of lactone character, a brown butter character comes from lactones. And so it's really a valuable commodity to be using because everybody wants natural. And here's one source. Discovered in about the 10th century, traded globally since the 17th century. Great interest in flavor companies since 1970s. In 1993, the Indonesian government said, you're killing all of our trees. You're taking the bark off and the tree dies. That's not very nice. You can't do that anymore. Or it's really going to be limited in what can be marketed. And of course, it throws the whole global market in a panic. We can't make these flavors anymore. We can't make these products anymore. Was the reason profit? Because what happened when the supply became limited, now that tree bark became really valuable instead of just valuable. So it wasn't profit, it wasn't ecological. Are they really trying to preserve trees, or are they saying this is a financial opportunity? It doesn't really matter. There was no more, or let's say very little, this product available to us. And so now what we find, flavor companies become plantation owners. And so you think, wait a minute, a flavor company, they make chemicals that go in foods. They're operating plantations. And that's not uncommon. So when the supply of something gets tight, there's enough around, we start looking for a place, maybe we have to start growing it ourselves or contracting one way or another. And so there's a number of plantations that are private companies, and they can go ahead and do this harvesting. But again, it's an interesting one. Well, this is what I was talking about, waste streams. So I covered this a fair amount. Waste gases from peanut roasting, coffee roasting, cooking jams, toasting cereals. Anybody drive up and down 35W right around 36, just north of 36? Do you ever get that nice smell of baking bread? Okay. And so I always think, man, what an untapped source. We should be over there collecting this fragrance of bread, how that's coming off the ovens. But waste gases, sure. I'm talking about that, collecting coffee, roasting aromas, and now have a product. But the same thing for blanching operations, cooking waters. There's a number of places where we've got waste products that can have a flavored material that's useful to us. And I mentioned the fusel alcohols. I said that'll come up someplace. Well, here it is. The fusel alcohol, what's left in the still after you distill the whiskey, is a fusel alcohol mix. About 5% ethanol, 12% propyl alcohol, 15% butanol, ethyl alcohol, 63%, and some residue. And now what the flavor industry has done is said, wow, isopropyl alcohol, that makes a wonderful ester for fruit flavors. Well, that's an alcohol, that's not an ester. But if we take some natural acid from acetic acid, maybe, from fermentation, we take that acetic acid, we put it together with butyric alcohol, we put it together with lactase enzyme, we've now got a nice fruity ester. So what was a waste product is a resource for fruity esters. We won't say much about regulation. I was going to say it's a pain in the neck, but that wouldn't be appropriate. So, okay, we'll skip that. There's places for them, and it's a problem everyone runs into, is how you deal with different regulations. Looking a little bit more at flavor and its perception. Well, there's not many flavor research groups. In the U.S., at one time, flavor was really a hot area. There's probably 8 schools that had big flavor research programs. We're probably down to 3, 4, something in that ballpark, maybe 4 schools that are really well known for it. And that's kind of interesting because flavor is still as important today as it was before. People eat what they like, not what's good for them. And so we look at flavor. It is really important to what we eat. We eat what we like. Has health implications, commercial value. You want your product to be a success. It has to taste good. So again, economics or health are 2 places. Talk about sugars, which I mentioned. Can we reduce sugar needs? And then there's some things about what role does food, nutrition play in health. And you've probably gotten into that enough times in different classes as well. But diet really is important on health. It determines health in many, many cases. Dietary factors thought to account for 30% of all cancers. Human costs of chronic diseases contribute for 70% of deaths. Financial costs of treating illnesses from not having good foods or proper foods and so on. It's you can kind of go down the list, and I think you get the hang of it that eating healthy is extremely important, and flavor can be a part of that. And it's the example I said about whole grains. People generally say, let's have whole grains. But if somebody won't eat it because it's bitter to them, we've got a problem. So can you get rid of that bitterness? So that's what we talk about. Bitter blockers. Are there substances? You might call them anti-flavor materials if you want, that can block that bitter perception so that people can eat healthier or will eat healthier. We'll probably go on another minute because I think we get a 10-minute break in there someplace, don't we? Okay. Good. A little bit of coaching to the audience here. Well, we spend a lot of time chemically looking at what are flavors. In case of desirable flavors, it really is helpful to know what chemicals create a desirable flavor. And you might say, well, wait a minute, why do we care? Well, Flavor uniformity in different processing locations. If we could take a coffee, for example, and say, we need this chemical at this level, we need that chemical at that level, and that one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and that's going to make a beautiful cup of coffee. There'd be some analytical control that we could go look at different coffees, different processing, different growing applications. What gives us this really desirable flavor profile? Because people are wonderful. People say it's good, it's bad. People say if they like it. But if we say, well, why do you like it? What is it in there that makes you like it? Well, sensory panels can't tell you that. They can't tell you they need this much of that chemical that much. And so if you can characterize a product, you know what makes it good. And if it's not good, you know what to look for. Oh, this is out of balance. This shouldn't be here, and so on. And so when we talk about, making a product in one place, one location, another one, are they the same? Are they different? What's changed? We want to enhance the flavor of food, add some components that are key to the whole thing. How to deliver flavor, protect flavor. No, I won't be. I'll go a different direction. Okay, I was going to say something about empirical approaches versus a chemical approach. Oftentimes, is that we will run into a problem in the industry, and very commonly, empirical approaches are tried. This is good. I think this is what the issue is. Let's try this. Oh, okay, that didn't work. Well, let's try this. No, let's try this. And of course, coming from an academic background, as you'd say, I'd really like to know what the problem is. If I knew what the problem is, maybe I could make my choices better. And that takes an investment that a lot of companies simply don't want to put in. If they can solve it empirically, good. If they can't, then it's a problem. And some of these things then reoccur. Maybe they found a solution at the moment, but it comes back. So, of course, being a prejudiced academic, I'd like to know what characterizes flavor, so if it's not right, I know what to do about it, perhaps. And that's the same thing that we're looking at in pea protein, penny crust, and so on. How are we going to design a process of getting a nice clean protein unless we know what we want to remove, unless we know what's causing that flavor? So we could try this, try that, and try that. Maybe one of them will work, but I feel much better knowing what I want to remove and designing a process to remove it, like off flavors. So anyway, so we could be talking about characterizing desirable flavor. We can certainly talk about off flavors. What are responsible for the off flavors? That gets into shelf life and degradation products and so on. So let's take a break at this time. So let's take 10 minutes, so roughly, 8 minutes after, and be back.
Oh, yeah. That's just thinking next to the but yeah, I think Chelsea gave me exact immediately. Yeah. I mean, there was like a specific like thing about it. Well, it is. It's like, but that was like
So we can get going again. So we'll kind of continue wandering. This isn't a focus. In many other times we're going to talk just about this. In this one we talk a little bit about that. And so I call it wandering. How's that? And so the flavor of the definition has changed. And in the past we limited to just aroma, taste, and chemisthetic. Used to call it trigeminal response. That's the heat of spices, the cooling of menthol, those kinds of things. And they were viewed as being independent. And so that's kind of interesting, where now there's certainly a broader consideration of the inputs, appearance, mouthfeel, exposure. A number of things come into this. And also they're really recognizing that there's a complex interaction. Aroma does influence what you taste. What you taste influences how aroma is perceived and so on. So we've really blurred the lines of what defines a flavor. It's much tougher to do than it's ever been. This is kind of a colorful idea of starting with an apple. You may be looking at it. What are your expectations? You look at an apple, you have a certain expectation of that apple. If it doesn't meet your expectation, it isn't a good apple, a good flavor. So kind of, you look at it, color, shape, size, okay, you got a shot at this, in fact, it might be okay. Then we say, okay, we'll make a decision, let's go for it. Take a bite out of salivary glands, enzymes for digestion, water for taste and infection. Chew it up, and in the oral cavity, you've got your tongue, where you're perceiving the taste components, the receptor cells. And again, in your mouth, the chemosensitive nerves, so again, heat peppers and cooling menthol and so on. At the same time, you're transferring odors back to the olfactory receptors and coming across. And you get some chemosensitive nerves from this direction, all going into the central processing area, and come up with some idea that, okay, that's an apple enough. Well, it's pretty decent. Well, it's acceptable to me. You don't eat and reject. So, flavor is not one thing or not independent, but they're all dependent on each other. There's some question about mouthfeel, whether that should be put into the category of chemical stimuli. That's what we worry most about, at least I worry most about, is the chemical stimuli that are present in the food that elicit some kind of a response. And mouthfeel is one that's kind of up in the air. What are we going to put it? How important is it? How does it influence your flavor perception? You probably all, I hope you've all been on a sensory panel sometime or another. I hope you've all seen these aroma profiles. So again, different categories of flavors, different foods that give each of these categories or ranges in here. Oral, microbiological, yeasty, watery, sweaty, hoarse, mousy. That doesn't sound so good. You can kind of go on down the line, but these, what do you call them, Sarah? A wheel, an attribute wheel, or a... You don't know. A what?
A flavor wheel or an aroma wheel.
That's not used in that way. Yeah. But again, it's you'll see these kinds of things. You'll see the same thing for toast profile. Taste profile. We'll get there. Umami. It's interesting. Usually, when you talk to the public, you talk about sweet, sour, bitter, and umami. I'm sorry, who? Where? Umami. The mouthfeel, the savory note. Why do you put chicken broth and everything? Why is Parmesan cheese so good on almost everything? Because of the monosodium glutamate in that Parmesan cheese. Why does the recipe call for a tablespoon of tomato paste? Because of the monosodium glutamate in that tomato paste. And so, umami, I think everybody's familiar with one way or another. Oftentimes it gets a bad press. It tends to be looked at unfavorably, but if you take it out of foods, food's looked at unfavorably. It is an important component of foods. And so that's, the taste, the 5 different receptors for taste. I don't know what to think of kukumi. I don't know if anybody has an opinion of kukumi. Hardiness, fullness. The fellow in Germany came up with this a while ago, working with a flavor company, and they've kind of defined it or created it. Not everybody buys into it as one of the perceptions for mouthfeel. But viscosity, astringency, particularly oil, tingling, sweetness, and there's a number of different categories and components that can give those attributes. So when we look at foods and flavor, we don't just look at one. We look at these various aspects and how they interact. To me, I'm always fascinated by the heat of spices and the cooling that occurs. Sarah?
Do you have an example of a food that would have like
For kukumi, I don't. How's that? I haven't experienced it, and I don't know that people have bought into it broadly. A flavor company has kind of said, this is it, and we can sell it to you. But, yeah, I don't have experience. Has anybody else been called on by a customer and talked about kukumi, and this is wonderful? Thomas Hoffmann in Germany is the researcher, who came across this and, I would say, has kind of pushed its creation, or existence, let's put it that way. But this is absolutely fascinating to me, that we have nerves that respond to cold temperature, but those same nerves can be stimulated with a chemical. So, we have cooling menthol, and various other components here. There's been a large area of research as well, cold, refreshing in the flavor industry. Tagasako has been a company that's really put a lot of effort into research to find these types of compounds. If you could have a beverage, a cooling, refreshing beverage that truly has a cooling character to it, it's worth it. But like I say, it's the same chemical, it's the same nerve that when it gets when it gets cold, it says, I'm cold, I'm not cold. But you get that same sensation by putting a chemical in your mouth, and then the nerves say, hey, I'm cold. And of course, that's the same with the heat of various spices. I'm always fascinated that you can break out in a sweat for something that, is room temperature. That just doesn't seem quite right, but it is. Pain, irritation, sure. So again, a number of different nerve systems that have an input. And it's one of the things that do tend to continue to exist as a tongue map. And so they say there's different parts of the tongue that are extremely sensitive, and it's probably somewhat of an urban legend. How's that? Because the receptors tend to be distributed throughout your mouth. They're not just, and every receptor has all 5 ability to sense all 5 of these taste components. And so the artistry, in my opinion, there may be a little more sensitive in one area than another, but it's not a map where, you only get salty sweet over here, and you only get sour here, and so on. But that's one of those things that hang around or last forever as well. And how do humans taste or flavor? Well, we get down to the tongue, and then she's a little either taste buds, each of these taste buds, fly from the tongue, and so there's the nerves that will carry your messages to the brain. That's not a very interesting one. This one's a nicer one. How's that? So this is the taste bud, and so within that taste bud, yes, you have receptors for all of the taste: bitter, umami, sour, and salty, and sweet. So they say every taste bud has the ability to respond to all of your specific tastes.
Are some of those they all have the same receptors, but are some of them more prominent in other areas of the tongue?
Well, every bud has apparently all the receptors. Is there a difference in sensitivity or response? I don't know. Nobody likes the tongue chart anymore, so I'd be inclined to say there's a pretty good distribution. How's that? Through chemostasis now tends to be, well, it's now called chemostasis instead of trigeminal. It's a broader term, so we're talking about stimulating some nerve by a chemical, so a chemical response. So stimulate pain receptors, touch hot heat of peppers, cold of menthol, many parts of the body, not just the mouth and olfactory region, which you might be aware of. One thing that I thought was really interesting that's in the same category of chemicals is that a company that got complaints that their cookies actually caused a mouth tingling sensation. It's a defect, getting consumer complaints. When you eat the cookie, it's weird. It's a weird sensation in my mouth. It's like, right. And so they brought it over to us, and we started looking for things. And what we ended up finding that a chemical called spilanthol, which was actually identified in a Brazilian product, and that product of nature was in the packaging. Wherever the cookies touched the package, that spilanthol would migrate over, volatile, move into the oil in the cookie. So the rest of the cookie would be fine, but that part near the package actually felt just like you're touching your lips. It just could be a better example. And so it's interesting what nerves can do and how they become chemically stimulated in some cases. And again, different receptors for each of these different taste properties. Aroma is exceedingly complex. Taste is certainly complex, but aroma, I think, wins in terms of complexity. A simple aroma would have probably 100 different components, 100 different chemicals. If you get into something like a cup of coffee, we've got close to 1,000. If you look at anywhere where we've had browning, roasting, cooking, we have a heck of a lot of products that come out of the Maillard reaction, different chemical degradations that are caused by the cooking operation. It's interesting that the nose can pick up as little as 10 to the minus 17 grams of some odorants. I always like to actually walk to the blackboard and put 17 or 16 zeros in that a one at the end. Remarkably sensitive to some chemicals, and we're terribly insensitive to others. But do we smell water? Oh yeah, at some point. Do we smell ethanol? It takes a fair amount of ethanol before we smell it. So we tend to be very, very different in how, or let's say the range of compounds and sensitivity is immense. And the fun part is Pichan's working with one of these that are probably in the 10 to the minus 17th area, where after lots of sample extract, you get a little bitty bump on the chromatogram at best, and that's the one that makes the product very interesting. So one of the challenges, a broad range of concentrations. Some things are just present in such low quantities, it's immensely hard to find an analytical method that can even get close to them. It was interesting, a few years ago, Linda Buck and Richard Axel actually won a Nobel Prize for understanding olfaction. So it's kind of warmed my heart to see something in the flavor area get a Nobel Prize. And so they looked really through the process of how perception, aroma perception works. It's interesting that there aren't many accesses to the brain. There's a skull over here that's followed in some pretty well closed up, except for your olfactory region. Your olfactory region, so if you think about how it works, you're breathing in, so you're breathing in, you go past, that's about the size of a postage stamp, and then goes down into the lungs and so on. You chew something up, you swallow it. You always exhale. You exhale. Have you ever swallowed and not exhaled? So you go ahead and chew a food up. You swallow it, goes down here, and then you exhale. Whatever went down that tube before has left some volatile compound, some residue, and that picks up volatile compounds, comes up here, and you smell it again. So if you can smell it as it's getting out to your mouth, you chew it up, you smell it on exhaling. And so here are the receptors for that, like I say, they're about the size of a postage stamp, and the only way that's through the skull. It's olfaction is so important to evolution. Whether, it's the idea of, I'm going to be kind of busy, but there's a lion over there. I want to be able to smell that lion. You think about animals, how they can pick up scents and how sensitive they are, whether it's for protection, whether it's for food. Most animals have a highly developed olfactory region. Now I'll throw in one free piece of information that an eagle can see a mouse 3 miles away. Okay. I was a National Eagle Center this weekend in Waukesha. That was actually fancy. How can you see a mouse 3 miles away? Well, there's your digestive system. I just wanted to develop it. That was impressive. So, okay. So here's your olfactory region. There's a mucosa, so it's mucilage type material. And we have receptors, so an odorant will come along here. It'll tend to be absorbed into this mucosa and transmitted into the receptor. So there's actually a kind of an active transport sampling the air that's coming through this system. And so it's here, and then it goes through a cascade that we'll show on the next slide. We're not going to spend much time with it. Sends up a nerve response directly to the olfactory nerve called up here. So we've got a system where we have a good transport system. We have a direct connection through the brain to the processing. So we were designed to be able to smell and smell really, really well. There's lots of explanations or information that's come out, again, how these receptors work. So your odorant comes in here, and it ends up causing a cascade of different chemical reactions that open either this pathway or this closed channel, the pathway, or ion channels. And so if this odorant is active, fits in the right place, causes it to happen, this panel opens and charges. Positive charged ions come in. There's now an electrical difference because it's picking up a positive charge that's in here. And that sends then an electrical nerve impulse. So it's really a complex system that, again, was developed and was part of that Nobel Prize. Yes?
Can you explain why an aroma compound is volatile or what a volatile, like in terms of the chemistry, why
What you mean? What defines a volatile?
like in terms of the chemistry,
What
why you can be able to stand it in the air?
Your aroma chemicals, your smells are going to be typically lower molecular weight materials. They typically will not be overly cold. You can get some polarity, but not too much. But they have to have a low molecular weight. And that means that they can evaporate. If they're bigger, heavier molecules, they're around 100, weighing 150, something like that. And they're just too big. They can't get into the gas space or the state of the food, water, whatever. So it's really molecular size and then kind of structure. Sugars and high electrical effect, 180 for glucose. But it's not false because of all the polarity around it. So, yeah, there's certain things that we find. Lots of things that are important. So there's more than 1,000 different receptors for aroma, and each odorant will trigger several different receptors. And again, we'll just get a diagram of it that comes up that kind of gives the idea. So many different types of receptors, and a given odorant will stimulate several different receptors. Some of those receptors may bind very strongly. So here's a molecule. We kind of get an idea of shape and fit. It's like an enzyme, for example. You've got to have your substrate fit into a certain slot in the enzyme. And so this may fit in, this molecule is the right configuration, polarity, chemical reaction. It's perfectly a good binding reaction. There may be some others that it doesn't bond with at all. This is one receptor, another receptor, another receptor, so there's 1,000 of them. Good fit. Doesn't have any interaction with some of those. Maybe have a weak interaction, doesn't fit very well. See a weak signal, But ultimately, what you're looking at is a pattern of response. So when you say something smells like cherry, well, it's hit enough of these different receptors that we get a pattern of this receptor responses. What doesn't, doesn't, and so on. So it's more of a pattern response than it is an individual. Some flavors or odorants, I should say, will change in character with concentration, but that's not often. Certainly things change in intensity, but when we talk about them really changing in character, so they smell of something in the dilute, and just not more intense, the same thing when they're higher concentration. And so there's been some discussion about, well, what we may find is that these odorants of high concentration, they stimulate. There may just be more mass action, more materials. They may stimulate more receptors than they do at low concentrations. And if we get this pattern of receptors instead of this pattern, well, this is a different flavor than here. So the idea is how many receptors and the pattern receptors can change with concentration. This is one of my favorites. I've got a few favorites in life, and this is one of my favorites too. What this was, I was sitting in the front row of an international meeting, and I had nothing to do with creating this. I just loved it when it showed. I'll explain why I love it so much. So this is now a situation where they're looking at chewing gum. And so this person's given chewing gum. At the same time, he's got a little mass spectrometer stuck up his nose. And so it's really tiny. Okay, it's just the inlet to the mass spectrometer. So you're monitoring what the flavor, the aromas being given off as the person chews the gum. So that is what's up their nose. It's sampling what the receptors truly are given. At the same time, they're taking a swab of saliva. Okay, chew 5 times saliva, saliva, saliva. And they're monitoring sugar and acids that are released. So what they're doing is they're monitoring the stimuli that the person's given. And at the same time, there's a sensory panel that's saying, the person's being judged. Okay, my peppermint gum is, maybe a peppermint. Okay, it's getting stronger. Whether it's verbally or whether it's simply done by a dial, the idea is that that's now sensory perception. So what do we have in this finger? Why do I love it so much? Well, this is aroma. This is mint aroma. And so the idea is over 5 minutes of chewing, the mint aroma didn't change, not significantly from here to here. But at the same time, perception dropped off. They were asked, rate the flavor. Well, I'm sorry, that flavor, mint flavor, it's gone. But they were still given the perception. They were still given stimuli, but they weren't perceiving it. What followed instead was sugar, the sweetness. And why I think it's so amusing is that if you look at the patent literature, there's more patent literature on extending the aroma release of chewing gum than any other product in the world. And so what this basically says is, forget the encapsulation, protection, control, release of flavor, aroma, make the sugar last longer. That's all you need to do. And so but for that matter, you might be able to just give that one whiff, and maybe that's good enough, and just keep eating sugar. And we'll come back to that when we talk about how we measure analytically the perception that we get from a chemistry standpoint and sensory standpoint. But that is funny, like I say, for all the money that's been spent on something that's no purpose to it. So anyway, these are some of the components that a flavor chemist was asked to create a strawberry forming. These are some of the things that would go into that formulation. It would be an artificial flavor because some of the components are artificial. Cis-3-hexenol, it's a nice green grassy melon rind, if you're going to describe it. Ethyl butyrate, fruity ethereal odor. I'm not sure what ethereal is. It sounds kind of creepy in a sense. But ethyl butyrate, fruity, I'll go for that. 2-methyl-butyric acid, so that's the hardness of the strawberry. Ethyl-methyl chemoglycinate, that's an artificial chemical. It's not found in strawberry, but it is what makes strawberry pretty much what it is, an artificial strawberry. Nature's found other ways to do it, but if you're doing artificial, this is the most characteristic component you use. Ethyl isovalerate, which is a nice ester, medium chain ester. Apple pineapple, gamma-decalactone, fatty creamy coconut. Isoamyl isovalerate, sweet fruit green. Methyl dihydrojasmonate, jasmine, okay, floral. So get a sweet floral character to it. If you want to make that so that's a nice fresh green strawberry. If we say I want a jam, so I want a cooked strawberry, you'd add maltol or granule for a brown jam character. So you could move it from fresh green to a jammy character. And kind of the message is that very few things are characterized by one chemical. There's typically a blend. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of these. That'll do it. Will it be a beautiful strawberry? Will it be something you say, wow? No. If you add another 10, 20 things, that could be beautiful. So nature never is one chemical. It's always a complex blend. And nature's done a nice job. So we also do a decent strawberry, maybe a cherry strawberry here. There are a few things that you can get by really simply. Usually in class I have you make a cherry, but I say you can't just make it benzaldehyde. Benzaldehyde is cherry. You smell it, you taste it, it's cherry. Maraschino cherries. It's not ever a cherry you've ever eaten in your lifetime. But it's a maraschino cherry that's already soaked in benzaldehyde, right? And that's what people think of cherry. It's like butter. There's almost no diacetyl in butter. But because people have been having butter popcorn in microwaves for some time, wouldn't you know, they identify diacetyl with butter, like even though it's not there. So it's fascinating. So you can do benzaldehyde with cherry, but if you want to make it interesting, you put something else in it. Do you want dark cherry? Do you want sweet cherry? What do you want? And actually, vanilla carries vanilla very well. One of the problems I got into with one of my past grad students is she actually went to work for a company that makes ice cream, and she said she was using artificial vanilla. I says, how? You what? You're not using natural vanilla? And she said, no. I said, why? Because nobody can tell the difference. And so, but maybe it's 100th of the cost today. I don't know where the vanilla market's gone, but it's been crazy for the last few years. So I don't know if it's gone down. But vanilla does pretty well vanillin does pretty well for vanilla, and cherry benzaldehyde for that. But generally, we have some mixture. And that would be a decent mixture. What do we think about? We've already talked about that enough. Flavor perception, multimodal. You betcha. How's that? We've got enough time to do one more. And that's on creation. So I should have given you both of these, right?
Yes.
Okay, Katie. So is this being recorded and will this work?
I think so. It should have saved. Yeah, it's
Katie has an interest in my being successful at this. Well, let me go down here. Okay. Well, flavor creation. It's really fun working here in flavor creation. You know, when you're a chemist and you just get a bunch of bottles and say, go for it. You kind of is like a kid in a candy store. There's absolutely no question. I had a lot of fun with it. My favorite flavor was actually a blackberry. It was a marvelous blackberry flavor. But it was $857 a kilo. And I got shot down because they wanted to be about $30 a kilo. I was only 20 times off. So that's what happens when you hire an academic. But no, it really was fun working creation. How does this go? What's the process for getting a flavor and request and turning it into a product? Well, in most cases, we still run the same way. A request from a product development person in the company contacts a salesperson. In some cases, a company may be big enough you have your own person actually that lives on your doorstep and said, you want a flavor, I'm here to help you. We've got Fermentation out here. Do you know of any other flavor companies, maybe Givaudan? Do they have an office here? A very common name. They do? So bigger companies can afford that to service other big companies. And so you're still probably working with a salesperson. They may put a technical person in that role too if you're a big enough customer. But you're probably going to end up going through a salesperson one way or another. Communication is extremely important, as you might guess. And if you really want to be successful, the best bet is to have the salesperson hook you up with the person who's going to create your flavor. And so you get right to the person who does the creation. And then you start talking about vocabulary. You must understand, all of us do, the problem of communication in general, how difficult it can be to understand, especially when you're dealing with different perception, different ways of seeing things. So vocabulary is extremely critical. Having single vocabulary, having some kind of a benchmark. We never created a flavor without getting a benchmark for it. If we're going to do a strawberry and we want fresh strawberry, you go down to the store and buy fresh strawberries, and that's what we taste in comparison. So how do you get the right vocabulary? How do you communicate what kind of strawberry, what kind of apple, whatever you want? And there's a lot of that. There's a good deal of information that's needed also then. So this is the flavor. But, okay, what kind of flavor do you want? Well, strawberry, that's fine. But if you want a fresh strawberry, you want to have the seed milk, you like it to be jammy, you like it slightly on ripe, so what's really the sense you're careful how do you communicate that? What will it be used in? And oftentimes companies don't like to say, well, actually developing a new product on the market, don't tell anybody, but it's going to be, competing with everybody else around. Nobody likes to say what they're going to use it for. If it's a new product, an innovation, they'd really rather keep it on the quiet side if possible. What will it be used in as much detail as you can get about it? So is it going to be a beverage? Is it going to be a carbonated beverage? Will it be artificially sweetened? Will it be sugar sweetened? If it's artificially sweetened, what are the absolute sweeteners that are used? What's the blend? And will there be natural juices in it? You need a heck of a lot. The more information you can give, the better chance you have of getting the flavor you want. But this is oftentimes a roadblock. No, I can't tell you that. How do you want to be labeled? Natural or artificial? Does it have to be kosher, halal, GMO free? Does it have to be organic? Cost constraints. What's your target for cost? Sometimes people say, oh, cost is an issue. Cost is an issue. Cost is always an issue. Cost is flavor is one of the biggest single items per kilo very few food ingredients are more expensive per kilo than flavor. Now that kilo may go a long ways, but when accounting looks at it, you're paying how much for this little bit? Cost comes into it. Do you have a target? Is there something you can give me? That, okay, this is the target you want. It could be me too. We want to make the same beverage that somebody else is making. Make it better.
So you mentioned at the time that whenever you're going to develop a flavor, then you can ask this separation cool. How stable are those? Let's say you mentioned one time that you want to get that specific, you can add another 10 compounds and get there. How stable are those 10 compounds to processing and storage to make sure that you will keep doing the value chain?
You can't guarantee it. That's a problem. You may have to pasteurize it or retort it or do something to make it shelf stable. And that can kill you, absolutely, in terms of the product. We run into that a lot. Have you ever had a coffee that's been put in a can and put in a vending machine? It doesn't come close to resembling coffee. So, the idea of how it's processed is extremely important as well. Because they're going to change during the processing operation. Is there target? And certainly more decisions that have to go in. So you get every bit of information you can get. Yeah.
I had a question relating to the previous slide. So how is organic and natural different from each other? Like, are all organic flavors natural?
No, not all are natural, not all are organic. Because, well, organic is kind of a silly definition. It's kind of hard to figure out. Natural doesn't mean organic. If it's organic, it has to be grown in soil that's been treated in a certain way or not treated in some way for so many years.
And you can't get an organic seal, like farms that grow it have to be like
approved as an approval. Yes. But it can't be a regulated, a number of things can, in terms of pesticides, herbicides can't be applied. So it can all be natural. It can be loaded with pesticides, herbicides, it can be all kinds of different things. You get what nature brought to you or the farmer brought to you. Yeah. So there's the difference. Then the next one is business potential. And that's an interesting one to me. Okay. So okay, you're just starting out in business. You've got a new product, and this is your first product. And your sales potential is how many dollars a year? Luck. You look at business potential, because you're not paying at that point for the service. You're going to get some trained person who might have 20, 30, 40 years of experience doing this job, and you're getting them nothing and expecting them to develop something for you. And the only way they get money back is if the company buys. If you buy that flavor from them, then maybe so. But they do the economics. If you don't have any history with them, you don't have any other products that you're buying flavors for. And by the way, one time you did buy flavor from us, and you only bought it for about 2 months, and then you had somebody else duplicate it, and you took the business away from us. You're not going to be on their list to do much for them, sorry. Maybe next time. Which is kind of interesting, the idea of past history. Because oftentimes, once a company does get a flavoring, then they send it out to another company and said, would you duplicate that for us? We want a second supplier. You go belly up. I got a national product, a global product. I want to know that somebody else can make that flavor for me. And so the idea, you stick with the company that gave it to you in the first place. You start squeezing in. We can get it cheaper someplace else or whatever. So what's your business potential? Now long-term, past history. So the bottom line is, so we go to the shelf. I got 540 different strawberries on my shelf right now. One of those must work for you, so let me send you that and forget it. I was interested. We had Tagasako in also last week, not this week. And that's one of our grads, PhD grads. And she said that average turnaround time is 2 days. So they get a request in, and they expect in 2 days they're going to have a sample sent out. It's not a lot of work. It's not a lot of time or effort that goes into it. Now, I'm sure there are times when they simply walk over to the shelf, that counts, and other times when they put a significant amount of time on. How important are you? If you're not important to them, you're not going to get them working for you. You're going to get something off the shelf. So there's this one. And most companies that are really small companies, Givaudan, IFF, Furnish, they won't bother with you. They'll send you to FONA, they'll send you to some other company, smaller company that might look at you as a potential. So it's an interesting one. So now you can start to consider, is it the development creation task? And you sit down and say, okay, they want this particular flavor, and we could pick it as a strawberry since we just saw one. Then the flavorist, they call him a flavorist, not a flavor chemist usually. The flavorist is the creator. The chemist is more the analytical person. So you start looking for materials and think, okay, what materials do I need? How have you characterized them in the first place? So we always kept a notebook, as you might imagine, back in those days. We would, every morning we'd get together and we'd taste 10 chemicals. So we as a group would sit down, we'd taste 10 chemicals that have been diluted at 3 different levels. And we make notes. Okay, this is how I perceive it. 1 part per million, it's this, 5, 10. I might think this goes really good in a kumquat flavor. Okay, and maybe a cherry too, if I want to get something to it. So you just build up, a library and say, this is what I can use. And that's what you would go to. I think, okay, these would probably fit. I've done some experience. And so the idea of characterizing chemicals. And it really is worthwhile to do that yourself. You can find lists of chemicals. The first book that's been published in this area was by Morris Jacobs, 1947, Synthetic Food Adjuncts. And so this is the first author that's ever made this kind of thing public. Ethyl acetate defined as colorless liquid, agreeable characters, fruit flavor. I don't know what agreeable is. I think that's in the mind of the beholder, right? Maybe agreeable to me, it's not agreeable to you. So somewhat pleasant. Okay, that's nice. Bittersweet. And the blue water. I'm not sure what bittersweet is. 1 specific gravity factor index. So there's a description, 1947, and you could go to that book and you could say, okay, then you give some model formulas. This is what they use for a strawberry or for whatever. Furia, Thomas Furia is the next author, 47 to 68, so 21 years later. Wouldn't you know, at last date, it's still fruity, bittersweet. I don't see ethereal. Okay. But I love this. Solubility good. Stability fair. Top note, fair, how would I use it? That's good. It's soluble in what? So, and we see this all the time. It's useless in terms of them. So then after Furia, Stephen Arctander, it's about that many of these books. Pleasant, ethereal, fruity, brandy-like, there we go. Somewhat nauseating, high concentration, most things are. Fruity, sweet, tomato taste, and blue water. So you could go through these books and you could find characters that you think would fit into this flavor that you want to create. Generuli was next, Arctander, and I guess just some examples. So 1-octene-3-ol, really mushroom, absolutely earthy mushroom note. And again, you'll see. There's been a series of articles more recently that still shows up, but there's nothing better than you doing it yourself. And that's exactly why every morning we tasted 10 chemicals. We did 50 a week. If you're there a while, you've got to build up a library. You build up some experience with these. And in fact, the idea is, yes, you really have to do it your own. There are training programs, and I think that comes kind of at the end of the presentation. Individually or together, and again, the idea of doing it together, I think, is really useful. Well, I think this chemical would be absolutely great for this. Oh, you think it's good for that? You got a point. Yeah, I think I could be used for that too. So you get diversity of opinions and thoughts you wouldn't necessarily have. So it's a good way to go about it, is doing it together. So once you kind of say that, okay, I think I know what I got, I'm going to have my materials. I got my workbench filled with chemicals on. Then I start thinking about, hey, how am I going to build this thing? Typically, you start with what we call character impact compound. And if you look at every plant material, there will be one chemical. That's interesting.
Did this turn off? This black box?
Back at this box.
No, over here.
Oh. It only had to last 3 more minutes.
It's gonna take
We got a minute and a half to go. But every plant tissue has at least one chemical that it is dominant. If you smell that chemical, you're going to say, yes, it's raspberry. That's an ionone, beta ionone. You will smell it and say raspberry. If you want it to go orange, you'll do some of the short chain aldehyde compounds. And so you start off with that. I want to build the flavor. I want to start off with what characterizes that signal. It's a really cheap flavor when you smell it, one chemical. And a nice example is lemon. I hope you've had at some point lemon drops. The sugar, pure sugar, they're about 39 cents for 1,200 pounds or something like that. And there's one chemical in there, citral. You got yellow color and citral. Cheapest lemon you'll ever imagine. But, okay, one chemical does it. But then you want to make it something better. You want to make that a well-rounded flavor. And so then you start looking at the addition of other chemicals. And probably we can quit because this is going to take longer than we have anyway. So you get off a minute and a half early. Remember, we've got a minute and a half in the bank. Anyway, have a good evening. That's strange.
So I think,
So it doesn't say that we're here.
sometimes that turns off. So,
Yeah. Oops.
the red.
I guess I'm not going to.